Here we go. Hi, y'all. I am very excited to introduce you today to Bish Marzook, a virologist working in London, who I met via my dear friend Chloe, who is a science writer in Australia. Chloe met Bish in Sydney. No, Newcastle. Yep, at the National Young Writers Festival, and connected her to me. And you're also a comedian.
In my past life.
I'm sure it's still in there.
But not as much as
I'm sure it's still in there somewhere. Before I do much else, I'll just ask you to tell me a little bit about your personal and academic background. What brought you to Australia? Why study viruses? Did I say you're living in London now? Did I say that? Did I mention that? Yes. Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Okay. Ooh. All right, going all the way back. So I'm Sri Lankan originally, but I moved to Sydney for my undergrad. And then, I don't know, I guess I just fell in love with microbiology and virology. So I decided to stay on to do my honors and then a PhD as well. I don't know, I feel like often scientists have these kind of origin stories where they talk about, oh, I've always loved looking at microscopes, looking at things out of a microscope or whatever. But to be honest, I don't know. I was just in the right place at the right time. There was a really good microbiology department at Sydney Uni. I made friends. I think the lecturers were really nice and supportive. So it was just a place that I wanted to be and stay. And I love being a scientist, but it's not all that I do. It's just, this path that I took down, but I could have easily, I think.
Okay. All right. All right. But it just continued and you didn't hate it and you could.
No, I loved it.
Yeah. And you must have been good at it if you were able to keep going. So, okay, cool. And then, how long, when did you, and what led you from Sydney to London?
A good question. So once you graduate with a PhD in science, it's always like, oh, do I get a real job now or do I keep going in research? And yeah, I wanted to pursue the research dream. So I moved to the UK about maybe 2.5 years ago now. So I worked in Cambridge for about 1.5 years. And then I moved to London to the Francis Crick Institute, which is where I am now.
Okay. All right. Very cool. For some reason, I was thinking you were originally from London. No. So really, you're just experiencing like the London lifestyle, just for a short time in the grand scheme of things. So
amazing London lifestyle that we can experience from indoors.
Yes. Well, your room looks lovely.
Yes, so we have a nice apartment. Yes, thank you.
Cool. What is your current research around? I understand you're currently doing a little bit related to the current pandemic and COVID-19.
A little bit. So it was quite frustrating for me because I've been a virologist for about 8 years. And then, as fate would have it, I actually moved at the start of the year from a virology lab to a parasitology lab because I became really interested in parasites because they're actually really cool as well. And so while I was making this transition, COVID was happening. And so now I'm like, damn it. Now everyone's interested in viruses when I've been banging on about them for like years and years. And now I'm getting really into parasites and everyone's like, ooh, viruses, these are cool.
Well, but you said you're doing a little bit, you said a joke about your pipe. Yeah, go ahead.
So the Francis Crick Institute where I work, it's an amazing institute, and they kind of realized early March that the UK was suffering from a lack of testing capability, not just for like citizens, but also for doctors and nurses and healthcare workers. So they decided to kind of pivot their research infrastructure towards a diagnostic pipeline, basically. So now they are running, almost 1,000 tests a day, I think, from what I know. Testing samples from like healthcare workers and patients in the neighborhood the Camden area, counselor
Okay.
and John. So I'm now luckily part of the team that's doing the diagnostic testing as
Oh,
well. So
wow.
I felt really lucky that I could use my skills in that way, because there are a lot of scientists, just sitting at home, not able to go into the lab, be they virologists or not. So yeah, I just feel really lucky that I can use those,
Right.
basic skills.
Yeah.
Something good.
1,000 tests a day just in the Camden area. Is that?
Just that's what the Crick is doing, yeah. But they're trying
Uh,
to ramp up to do more in the coming
okay.
week.
Right. Right. I don't understand exactly how that works, but I'm so glad that you do. And I'd love to ask more about that. But I did want to talk to you specifically. You said you said now that everyone's interested in viruses and now you're working with parasites, but now is your chance to shine, Bish, on my
I
Facebook
know.
page.
Yeah. So this is my last, yeah, my last
um,
hurrah before I say goodbye.
no.
No, it's not
Well,
true. The parasite that I study also has its own viruses. So,
oh, there we
so
go. Well,
yeah.
well, yeah. So I have very little understanding of science at all. I was a creative writing major. I did my minor in environmental studies. So you are going to have to like take it down to possibly like 12-year-old level with me. So I apologize. But I was trying to do a bit of reading beforehand to kind of feel more like aware, and I was like, I'm just going to be myself, and so I'll just start. What is a virus? How do they work? What would you say?
This is probably the hardest question for me to answer. The problem of like the more you know about something, the harder it is to
Yes.
like answer it. What is a virus? I would say, so there's a lot of debate or like, are viruses alive or not, and people try to classify it that way, but I find it's not really helpful to think about it in that way. Like, viruses are amazing molecular machines, first of all, but they're just pieces of genetic information wrapped in like a protein coat that
Mm-hmm.
their main job is to make more of themselves, to
Right.
self-replicate. But they are so diverse. So viruses are more genetically diverse than all the animals or plants on Earth. So they've been around for much, much longer. So they've diversified a lot more than we've been able to. So they're incredibly old, they're incredibly diverse. And they do a lot of functions that people don't give them enough credit for. So we only kind of think about viruses as things that cause horrible diseases, so like the flu or coronavirus or smallpox. But our bodies, like, people are just trying to now understand that our bodies controlled or not controlled, they're full of microbes, so the gut microbiota that help us digest and do all of these things. But our bodies are also similarly full of viruses. A lot of them are in the bacteria that are within us as well, but we also have viral DNA that's part of our own DNA. So viruses, they retroviruses, for example, they can integrate their genomes into the host genome. So human DNA is chock full of these retrovirus elements, and these things drive evolution. And so we're really just amalgamations of a bunch of different bacteria and viruses. So yeah, viruses are just so much more than
a terrible pandemic taking over the world at the moment.
Yeah, they're part of us. We are them, they're us. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So so one thing you said that we have viruses within the bacteria in our gut.
Yeah, so a lot of viruses, a large proportion of them are what we call bacteriophages. So they specifically infect bacteria, not human cells or animal cells or plant cells. So they kind of are one of the main driving forces for genetic exchange between bacteria, for example. And they also form a large part of the viruses in the sea as well.
Right. Do you, I guess it's just interesting because I've heard a lot people say, oh, this is a virus, it's not a bacteria, therefore we can't do this thing. And so I kind of think of them as completely different things. Like antibiotics cure bacteria, but
Yeah.
right, but they can't cure a virus. So that's just,
So that's still correct. So
yeah.
it's just that there are some viruses that can only infect bacteria. But so if you have an antibiotic that is targeted against the bacteria, then it would still, just target the bacteria. So we don't have to worry about bacteriophages that infect bacteria.
Right.
Although the interesting thing that you bring up antibiotics is that for a while, bacteriophages, so viruses that infect bacteria, were considered as an alternative to antibiotics to
Uh-huh.
cure bacterial diseases. So instead of using a drug to target a bacteria, could you use a virus that will kill the bacteria
Right.
instead?
Is
So,
that still happening?
I think it's coming back into fashion now. So apparently, I guess I'm not a very good historian, so don't quote me on this. But I think maybe sort of in the 70s and 80s, like antibiotic research kind of diverged, where apparently the Russians were really interested in bacteriophages. So instead of, doing drug manufacturing, they wanted to try and figure out, can we use these virus infecting bacteria to cure bacterial diseases?
Right.
And then maybe the Western world went towards, let's use drugs. But now that, there's a huge problem of antibiotic resistance with these drugs, like there's more research now back into.
It just sounds so interesting to me because we are seeing how much damage one tiny little virus can do. That sounds like a very risky thing. Is that just because I've been brainwashed by the by the terror from this virus? Is it would that be? I don't know. That's crazy.
You mean you trying to use bacteriophages
Yeah,
to
it
kill
seems like.
bacteria as a risky thing? No, so they're very, very specialized viruses that will really only infect bacterial cells. So
Right.
I don't think there's any
Right.
chance of a crossover.
I want to keep talking because I'm sure this must be frustrating for you when there's so much you can say, and I'm like,
No.
Do you think, so you said there can be good viruses and that there's viruses within us all the time?
Yeah, so one example of my favorite kind of a virus story is that so the reason that we have that mammals exist, for example, so a mammal is an animal that has that placental divide between the child and the mother. The reason that exists is because of a viral protein that our bodies express. So it's called syncytin. They're called the syncytin family of viral proteins. And the reason we can make that protein is because it was originally made by a virus. And the function of this protein is it basically, when a virus infects a cell, it has to make more copies of itself and then normally escape the cell and infect a neighboring cell.
Right.
Does that make sense? But so
Yeah.
what this syncytin protein does is it makes an infected cell fuse with its neighboring cell. So in that sense, the virus doesn't have to escape a cell and then infect the neighboring cell. It can just make the original infected cell fuse with its neighbor cells. So it can kind of move that way between cells.
And create
So
a placenta? No.
So basically what a
Really?
placenta is so you have these cells that are kind of fused with each other that then, I'm not a placental biologist, but my understanding is that that allows you to create this barrier between the mother and the baby that allows the baby to develop within the mother, as opposed to the animal having to lay an egg. So syncytin protein causes the cells to kind of fuse together and form this tight barrier, which is the placenta. And so this virus at one point, infected an animal, and then that DNA, when it went into the germline DNA of the animal, then started making this protein, and then that's how we believe mammals as a species developed, and this happened over multiple times. So that's how we have like marsupials versus rodents and primates. They have kind of different kinds of these syncytin proteins, so it happened like multiple times in evolution, and that's because of a virus. So we have babies because of viruses.
That's crazy. So in layman's terms, a virus infected like an alligator or a reptile.
Sure, yep.
And turned it into a mammal over thousands and thousands, if not millions of years.
Yep.
Whoa. Okay, that's very cool. That's very cool. Right.
That's my favorite story about how viruses are cool.
That is a beautiful story. And so yeah, I guess that's just interesting because I definitely think of virus. Virus has got a terrible PR person at the moment. You hear it and it's just negative and scary. So would you say just as like, do you know how many there are in the world?
No, that you can't. Yeah, it's very hard to say because the problem with viruses, so already there's a problem with bacteria and microbes you can't see, because traditionally the ones that you knew about are the ones you were able to culture in a lab.
Right.
So you take a bit of stuff from the soil or seawater and try and grow it in the lab, and then based on what you can make grow, you have sort of an idea of what's there. That's what we used to do in like 70s, 80s, 90s. But now with the advent of DNA sequencing technology, we have the power of not having to physically make something grow in the lab. You can just take a bit of pond water and run it through the DNA sequencer, and then you get a bunch of DNA sequences that give you kind of a better spread of what's there. But even then, people are discovering new viruses all the time.
And all viruses have DNA?
DNA or RNA. Okay. So they have to have some sort of genetic material, but it can be RNA based, which
is how it spreads so well. No.
DNA or RNA viruses can spread equally. So smallpox, for example.
Yeah, let's jump into smallpox because I could keep talking about this for the rest of the time. So your background is in smallpox research.
So smallpox research, specifically vaccinia virus research, which is the virus that was used to vaccinate against smallpox.
Okay.
And they're very closely related.
Yes. So can you tell me a little bit more about that? I think a lot of people, I didn't even know, I would say that smallpox was a virus off the top of my head. Like I would say I knew that it was a wildly contagious disease that killed a lot of people and was really dangerous. So yeah, tell me more about how smallpox works and what you were specifically looking at.
Yeah, so smallpox is probably like the oldest disease that we know of. There are records of like mummies from like, I don't know, ancient Egypt that have the smallpox scars. So we know that it's been around for a really, really long time. And, it was, it spread, through China, India, Europe, and then Europeans, brought it to sort of like the Americas and Australia as well through imperialism. So it's like a disease that was spread around the world through those acts.
Was it like the early, what year was it? What time frame was smallpox? Was it 1800s?
So smallpox was around from like the 4th, 5th century. And like the Egyptian mummies that we know.
Sorry. Yeah.
It's a very, very, very old disease.
Right.
We also know, so the practice of
you said that.
That's right. So the practice of vaccination as we know it in the Western world is very recent. So Edward Jenner is credited with inventing the smallpox vaccine. But the practice of inoculation or variolation, which is giving someone a bit of like virus or like infectious or whatever, was actually practiced in like China and India and the Middle East for like centuries. So it was very common practice in other parts of the world, but it's only become kind of codified within Western like medical records, through the Royal Society and things like that, only from the 18th century. So it was when there was the ambassador, so the wife of the English ambassador to Turkey in sort of the 18th century witnessed people in Turkey doing this practice of variolation, so taking a bit of like infectious pus from a smallpox pox and then giving it to someone else, and she was like, oh, I think they're using this to protect people.
They're onto something.
Yeah, exactly. And then she told Edward Jenner about this, and then that's when he started experimenting on milkmaids who were getting cowpox from cows. So the original kind of inoculation against smallpox was using cowpox, because Edward Jenner realized that there were milkmaids who weren't getting smallpox, and he thought that that's because they were being protected by working near cows that would get cowpox. So there are different kind of variations of the pox, of orthopox viruses. So one that infects cows, one that infects humans. You have mouse pox, monkey pox.
Right.
And so the word vaccination comes from vaccinia virus, which is believed to have come from cows as well. So vacca is the Latin word for cow. And so he then started using this vaccinia virus to inoculate people against smallpox. And then he termed this practice vaccination. And so that's where we get the word vaccine from.
Okay, right. So there were kind of two separate things. There was the observation of the guy's wife, and then there was a different situation with the cows. Or is it?
Yeah. So, so the wife of the ambassador to Turkey, Lady Mary Montagu, she noticed this thing happening in Turkey, and then brought it back to England and was telling people about it. And then Edward Jenner was one of the.
So she started the kind of speaking about this new idea, and then from that, he kind of picked up on that. Wow.
Always a woman. But as I said, it's a practice that had been happening in China and India.
Which is so interesting to me, because now when we hear, I don't want to give too much time to anti-vaxxers at all, but they talk a lot about big pharma and their desire to control everything. But this is like the opposite of big pharma.
Practice,
right.
People know it works. So it's kind of sad when,
Yeah. Well, that's why, you said you're not a history buff, but you certainly know more than I do. And I actually think that's really important. It's important we talk about history and we hear these things. I wanted to ask about the situation with the cows. And did he go through lots of trials like we're talking about now? Did he have to go through the same protocols that we're talking about? Or was it just like, hey, the milkmaids?
No, there are much better safety practices now.
Right.
So the first time he actually tried his vaccine trials was with a boy, I believe. He gave the boy a bit of cowpox, and then
right, didn't
no
like signing your name away to be like
nope. Very
right, but it worked.
It did work, so
and
So he first started off using cowpox, and then there is a bit of contention as to where the current vaccinia virus actually comes from, because people believe it may have actually been horsepox, but we can't say for sure because horsepox is now extinct, so we don't actually have the original horsepox
to test it.
Exactly, but so now vaccinia virus is what we use as the main vaccine against smallpox, but it's also used as a cell biology tool. So that's what I used it more, to just understand basic cell biology about how our cells work. So the cool thing about viruses is, as I said, because they have been around for much longer than ourselves, and their job, oh no, not their job, but what they do is is to infect us. So they really know how to, dampen our immune responses, or to, do things that make replicating better for themselves. So what a lot of basic scientists like myself do is study these viruses to understand more about our own cells. So we've discovered so much about human biology by following viruses and see what they are, attacking within our cells. So we know, oh, the virus is attacking this protein, so this protein must be important to do this thing.
Right. Right.
But also,
Go ahead.
I'm just like expounding the uses.
No, please. I expand away. I just am aware I don't want to take too much of your time, but also it's very, very interesting.
Oh,
so
wow. Actually, I could talk about this forever.
I will let you.
One of my favorite things about the virus that I was working on is that people are also using it. One of the cool things about this virus is that it will, well, one of the good and bad things is that it can be engineered to target specifically cancer cells. And so there's a huge, there are a large number of labs and companies trying to use viruses as what they're calling oncolytic therapies. So viruses that you engineer to specifically target cancer cells, to replicate in cancer cells, and then, kill those cells off, or make cells more more immunogenic is what we call them. So more easily identified by your body's own immune system, so that your body can deal with the cancer cells.
So it's almost like they can be a tool.
Exactly.
In some ways. It's just, so let's kind of go for that. So you have definitely made clear that, I mean, and actually even with the smallpox thing, it was another virus. It was a virus that was causing all this damage, but it was another virus that fixed it. But talk to me just briefly, if you can, what do you think about this current situation, and with your kind of academic peers and scientists and researchers, what are do you think are you terrified?
Terrified, I guess there's terrified on a personal level, and then terrified for like the societal level as we know it. On a personal level, I feel like even though we are hearing, cases of like younger people dying because of the disease, or, suffering, even not even dying, but suffering, morbidities like, lung issues and things, that is happening. But I still feel the statistics mean that in general, as a younger person, you are more safe. But obviously on a societal level, it's horrible and terrifying, and scientists are scared for what it means for society in general. It's also because it's I think people are expecting scientists to have a lot of answers very soon. People have been studying HIV for like 20, 30 years, and we still don't really have a cure. So,
and HIV is a virus as well, isn't it?
Yes. But quite a different kind of virus as well. And this is the other thing that people have to understand, is that, like I said, the diversity within the virus world is much, much bigger than any other kind of plant or animal kingdom. So they work in very, very different ways. So coronaviruses are very different to the pox viruses, which are very different to HIV, for example. So and they also haven't been traditionally researched very much. So the funding to work on coronaviruses has been not as much as, say, HIV or other more popular viruses. I think the public also have to understand that scientific research is also very much influenced by market forces,
Right.
and what can be sold to, funding institutions, and also, pharmaceutical companies. So there was never any money in coronavirus research.
Right.
There is
Right.
now. So
Yeah.
you have a lot of
Yeah.
people kind of pivoting to coronavirus research because there is more money in it now, but it's going to take the scientific community a lot of time to get to that stage.
Um, do you think it's crazy that we haven't been hit by more viruses? The way you talk about them and the fact that they're everywhere and they're so old. Like, I kind of like, just from this conversation, I'm like, how have we not been devastated as the human race?
So the thing is, we
That
are
was a
actually.
surprise question. Sorry.
No, that's fine. It's a
Yeah.
really good question. But this is the thing. It's that every kind of virus that we are currently dealing with is, in essence, a zoonotic virus. So a zoonotic virus is one that has kind of crossed over from like the animal world to the human world. And, I guess this is kind of an argument again for a more kind of holistic understanding of, humans are not separate from the rest of the world that we live in. Viruses are part of us, but also we are constantly being. So HIV, for example, was a zoonotic event. So it was, a kind of a simian virus that crossed over to humans. A lot of all of the coronaviruses that we know were crossover events from um,
Right.
from like avian or bat origin
Yeah.
or swine origin. Or that was the flu. But so
Mm-hmm.
all viruses are, like crossing over from like animal reservoirs to human reservoirs. It's constantly happening.
Right.
There's a huge there are people that I know of whose whole job is to constantly monitor like viruses that are moving from animals to humans. It's happening all the time. We're just not
Yeah.
hearing about it really.
Right. And maybe they're not always as contagious, perhaps.
Yeah,
So like it's
they kind of, like, for example, like Lyme disease or West Nile virus, or there are virus, so for example, dengue virus or Zika virus. They are, quite infectious, but yeah, they're not causing deaths on the scale that we're
yeah.
seeing, or such, visceral
Yeah.
morbidities in people.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they're still happening.
They're there. I'm going to skip over a few questions because I would love to keep talking, but I know it's Sunday morning there, and you're probably keen to start your day and have your coffee and everything. And
Yeah.
oh, you do? Yes, yes. Want to clarify? It's the morning there, it's the evening here. That's why I have my wine. I'm not drinking wine 10:30 in the morning. So yeah, I'm just going to thank you so much for all that kind of scientific information. And maybe if you're up for it, maybe I could get you sometime down the track and we could talk a little bit more from the scientific perspective. I also was just wondering from a personal perspective, and I didn't realize that you're Sri Lankan, so I was thinking your family's in London. Is your family okay? Yeah.
Yeah, they're okay. So Sri Lanka has taken a very so they've gone up like with full curfews. So
Right.
people weren't allowed to go out to the shops for groceries or medicines. So it was a little bit more intense, but I think because of that, they have been able to contain the virus quite well. But yeah, my dad had to ask his pharmacist to deliver all of his medicines.
They can't even go to the shop. So are they delivering groceries?
Yeah, delivering groceries, medicines. But it was kind of I think it maybe could have been organized a bit better because luckily my dad had our pharmacist number who knew him, so he could deliver all of his medicines to him. But I really don't know what other people who needed
I have no idea what the situation is in Sri Lanka. So the numbers are low, the numbers are good, and
they are being able to be contained. I think there are like they had full-on curfews for about a month, and then they were trying to open up some areas, not Colombo proper, but areas outside of the capital. But then I think they had a few more cases, especially in a naval base. So then they reintroduced the curfews. I think trying to figure it out.
I know, like everywhere. And what is London like? So tell me, yeah. So you're still going out a little bit for work, for testing and stuff like that.
Yep. So
Uh-huh.
twice a week. I just started it, I think last week or the week before. So that it felt really good to finally be able to go out.
Yeah.
To be useful. But I mean, we're still allowed to go out once a day for exercise or to, buy groceries. So I've been doing that. But I was really surprised by the extent at which it's really interesting. There's like this cognitive dissonance because I do feel like London has shut down a lot more than other cities. So my friends in Sydney, for example, still are going to their favorite cafes to get a coffee and a pastry and things like that. But
right. Yeah.
Everything was shut down in London, at least in my area. So you couldn't even get a coffee or pastry or whatever.
True torture.
No, it's awful. No, but I think it's really interesting to see the level at which people took it seriously, but also people are congratulating Australia, and rightly so, for being able to contain the virus. But I think Australia also has the luxury of being able to completely shut its borders, and put people initially in detention centers is what they were doing. But now I guess in hotels, but the UK is not doing that, but also like we're a much more densely populated country. So it is harder on those levels as well. But yes, like I think there were other issues with the NHS, supported as well as it should be.
I interviewed a nurse from Scotland and talked to her. She was doing all right, but she was in quite a rural area. So I would imagine like if you're working in the heart of the city or anything like that, I think big cities, it's just harder. Like I think New York City as well. It's just, exactly. the fact that we're so close to one another in places like that is just not great. Yeah. So, well, I'm glad you're able to get out a little bit, and I'm sorry you haven't been able to have a coffee in a while.
No, oh God, first world problem.
Before I let you go, is there anything else you want to mention? Do you think there's anything we're not talking about right now that we should be? Is there anything there?
I think it's something that I haven't been really talking about because I didn't want to think about it myself. And I think maybe people are trying to articulate it now, but I think what we're seeing is, I had a lot of like friends and family members messaging me being like, asking me, when is a vaccine going to happen? When can we come out of this nightmare? Like, when do you think a vaccine is happening? Are you working on a vaccine?
Yeah.
But I really think it's going to actually take quite a while. So I think in one sense, it makes sense that we're not really talking about it because we're trying not to think about it. But I really do think we should be, preparing all of ourselves mentally to be in this kind of socially distanced
reality
for a while.
You mean like years?
I guess until a vaccine is made, which still is going to be. I don't think we would have one within the year.
Do you think it's possible we could not find a vaccine? Do you think that there's?
I don't think so.
Because there's so much money and effort. Like the whole world, is definitely like you were saying earlier. There wasn't a lot towards coronaviruses in the past, but now.
This is definitely the most I think anyone has ever put into curing one disease. So, I mean, it's down to the science, and if even something like that is possible. The other reason why, it's been more challenging to develop a vaccine is no one has ever made a vaccine against a coronavirus before. That specific kind of class of viruses that work in that specific way. So I think that it's going to be a challenge to prove that this vaccine is working and has longer lasting effects.
So the flu shot, is that not a coronavirus vaccine?
No, so the flu is a flu virus. So it's
okay. All right.
different.
Okay,
coronavirus.
interesting.
Yeah.
All right,
So,
yeah.
but even with the flu, that's right. So we have, seasonal flu shots. So
Mhm.
a different one has to be developed every year. So it might be likely that something similar has to be done for the coronavirus, where people have to get, every 1 or 2 years a new shot, because I don't think it could be because the coronavirus mutates, but there's a lot of talk about mutation
Yeah,
rates.
I've been
That
reading.
coronaviruses mutate at a much slower rate than influenza,
Oh,
so
okay.
I don't know if that would be the case. It might just be you need a booster every 2 years,
Yeah,
because immunity doesn't last. But several vaccine arms, like several companies, trying to make a vaccine that does provide longer lasting immunity, but this is all like very, very new
yeah,
science.
yeah. That was
Yeah.
one of my questions earlier, and I'll just. Do you think that they're moving too fast, or do you think they're on track for? Because I heard
I
some
don't
alarm about people like signing up to be tested without knowing how the long term effects might, basically being the boy with
Oh,
this.
right, like the trials are moving too
Yeah,
fast.
yeah,
I don't know if too fast is, yeah, something that. So, in any case, a coronavirus vaccine. I'm not a
yeah,
vaccine person,
yeah,
or a medical person, but I guess maybe the way that I think about it is, if you're a young, healthy person, anyway, getting the actual coronavirus is probably not going to kill you.
yeah,
So volunteering to
yeah,
test a coronavirus vaccine,
yeah,
out of the goodness of your own heart, which
hmm
is amazing. Yeah, volunteers,
yeah,
I think that should be, thanked
yeah, yeah,
um, greatly. So I think, the risk of something going wrong
yeah, yeah.
is
I
low. In
mean,
my mind, that's how I
yeah,
think about it.
yeah. I mean, also, it's like you're risking getting it just by going out, right? So it's like,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly. So,
so what do we have to lose?
yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of amazing people doing really amazing things right now, and all kind like people volunteering for that, you helping to get results and for the testing, and taking time to share your information with a creative writing major like myself. So
No,
um,
this has
uh,
been really fun. Thank you.
thanks so much, Bish. I really appreciate you talking to me.